see by the little icon, we have almost 50 participants already. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their Thursday evening to join us on this virtual town hall forum meeting on the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago second train project. It's a project jointly managed and led by the Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota Departments of Transportation with help and advocacy from the Great River Rail Commission, from the La Crosse Area Planning Committee, and from a number of cities and counties and other organizations up and down the river between St. Paul and La Crosse. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. My name is Kevin Roggenbuck. I'm a senior transportation planner with Ramsey County Public Works. I'm also a staff member to the Great River Rail Commission, and wanted to let you know that there's just a couple of housekeeping things. Due to the size of our forum, we're going to keep your microphone muted. We encourage you to keep your camera on, though. We'd like to see you and see that you're engaged in the conversation. Thanks to many of you for submitting questions in advance of the meeting. We have a number of your questions. We'll get to those as we progress in the meeting. And then during the meeting too, you can ask further questions. If you hear something in the presentation that sparks another question in your mind, please go ahead and ask that as well. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. If you're familiar with Zoom, on my computer at least, if you scroll down the bottom, there's a little thought bubble with the word chat underneath it. You can tap on that and just type your question right into the chat, or you could wait to be recognized and unmuted. And you can ask in person if you'd like. We've got a number of speakers who are going to discuss the second train project this evening. We hope to wrap up in about an hour. If we need to go a little longer to answer your questions, we'll be happy to stay. We're glad to have you here. And with that, I will introduce Goodhue County Commissioner Paul Drodos and Redwing City Council Member Laurel Stinson from the Great River Rail Commission to say a few words about themselves and the project. And starting off with you, Commissioner Drodos.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here tonight because I believe in passenger rail in America and in Redwing, Minnesota, which is in Goodhue County. I want to welcome all our Zooming friends here tonight and to an important discussion about passenger trains in our future. Hopefully before too long, we can all be Zooming down the rails while we're Zooming on our laptops. As Kevin said, I'm Goodhue County Commissioner Paul Drodos, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Great River Rail Commission. We serve as elected officials for 18 government units from St. Paul to La Crosse. We want more trains between St. Paul and Chicago because that means more opportunity for business, for communities, for college students, for tourism, and yes, just relaxing while going places to have fun. We want all these things in a much lighter carbon footprint to boot. And now we need to work together to get them. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we have a lot of experts here this evening, and all of them have been working very hard to design and do the paperwork to accomplish the TCMC, which of course stands for Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. And we need those things to get rolling. It's amazing to me that it takes a supercomputer to run a railroad, but it still takes paperwork to run the world. So welcome everyone, and thank you for attending, and I hope we can make some progress here tonight. And I'd like to turn it over to City Council person Laurel Stinson, who will be joining us next. Thank you, Laurel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laurel Stinson. I'm a new member of the Great River Rail Commission, and I'm really excited to be learning alongside all of you tonight. I asked to be Redwing's representative on the Great River Rail Commission because I feel really strongly about how much these projects can benefit Redwing and the surrounding communities. Both Redwing and these communities as a tourist destination for passengers and for our businesses who rely on freight shipping on these same railways. And so I'm really excited to be sharing this with all of you tonight, and I'm a big supporter. And I will next introduce the new president of the Redwing Chamber of Commerce, Michelle Larson.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. Sorry if I'm a little dark. I just got back to my house and I'm hiding in my car because it's much quieter here than it is inside my house with my boys running around. Yes, like she said, I am the new director of the Redwing Area Chamber of Commerce. I am working through week 4, so fairly new to the Redwing area in the sense of being the chamber director, but not unfamiliar with the region. I am from Lake City and frequent Redwing all the time. So very familiar with that, and also with this project. So we have heard about this in previous years, being in Lake City as well. And there's a lot of amazing benefits that can occur from having a second train. We obviously business growth is a huge one, and that is crucial to the sustainability and success of the entire Redwing community and region. So anything we can do to enhance businesses and encourage them to grow and increase traffic to them from tourists and visitors who can come by train, it adds more infrastructure to the community, and anything in that matter is ultimately going to benefit the Redwing community.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. We're going to, before we get into the presentation, we're going to ask you to take a little survey. We'd like to ask you a question about the second train, and that'll be coming up on your screen. There it is. Take a little poll here. Have you ever traveled on Amtrak's Empire Builder train? Is our question there. And if the second train is implemented, there will be operating and inventory savings or shippers. What do you think the value would be over 30 years? What do you think the economic value of this? A lot of people think of a second train as just another passenger train, but there's, as we heard from the previous speakers, there's great economic value here too. And then finally, there's a third question there as well. How many annual tourism dollars do you think could result from the second train? So you can fill that out. I think we're going to give you a little bit of quiet time for the next 15 seconds or so to fill that out. I won't do the Jeopardy music, but you go right ahead and take a look at those questions and please fill those out for us. Thank you. All right, I've filled out my survey. I know all the answers, so I cheated and I got them all right. I know I got an A, but thank you for doing that. Jill, are we gonna have I think, or Jeff will have the results of that a little bit later oh, there it is right there. This is better than the elections. The results are right up here. 92% of you said you have traveled on the Empire Builder train before. That's nearly all of you. That's fantastic. If the second train were implemented, talk about the savings. Most of you, a little over 2/3 of you said 34 million. A few of you estimated 21. Are we giving the answers to folks right now? Jeff says yes. The answer to this question number 2 about the freight savings on operating and inventory savings is $34 million over 30 years. The 30-year life of the project is what MnDOT and WSDOT used when they submitted the federal grant application, and they estimated that kind of return, which is fantastic over 30 years. And then finally, third question, how many annual tourism dollars do you think would result? Most of you guessed 4 million, a few of you, very close guess at 2 million. The answer to that question is about $4 million. And we'll have that, I'll cover that benefit a little bit later in the presentation. So I'll save the kind of the results for that until just a little bit later. And with that, I will turn it over now to Frank Letterly and Dan Chrome from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. They'll give you an overview of the project. They'll talk about all the technical details about the construction of the project, how much it costs, where it would run, and a lot of the engineering types of details about the project. So go ahead, Dan and Frank.
Okay, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay. That's the first question to ask. The second one is you're on mute, so I got that one out of the way. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I really want to thank the Great River Rail Commission. I've been working with them since they began, and their advocacy for this project and passenger rail in general is something that has kept us moving in a somewhat forward direction. A lot of fits and stops, but we're working to get this system developed. Frank Letterly from NDOT as TCMC project manager, will be available to answer any of the more complicated project questions that I would stumble on. So I also want to thank the Chamber for being a co-sponsor, and then our partners, like I mentioned, Great River Rail Commission, the Ramsey County Rail Authority, Amtrak, the FRA, and obviously our neighboring DOTs to make this happen. The TCMC project's been in development for nearly a decade. And we can move slides there, Kevin, or I believe you're controlling those. Yeah, or Jill is. Thanks, Jill. It's been in development for nearly a decade, including the 2015 Amtrak led feasibility study supporting the need for a second train between the Twin Cities and Chicago. As many of you know, the route is the same as the Empire Builder service between Seattle, Portland, and Chicago, including stops in St. Paul, Redwing, and Winona. Oftentimes, Empire Builder is a late arriving eastbound in St. Paul due to weather, road construction, congestion to the west. So on-time reliability heading to Chicago will greatly be enhanced since the TCMC service will originate in St. Paul. Next slide, please. Bear with me every few seconds here. I'm working on 2 different computers here so I can read my notes. Technology is wonderful if you can get it to work, right, Paul? The project and features include add another round trip per day, complementing the existing Empire Builder service 3 stations in Minnesota, St. Paul, Redwing, and Winona, and a total of 13 stations along the corridor. Ridership is estimated about 124,000 trips annually on the TCMC and 123,000 annually on the current Empire Builder service. During 2019, the Empire Builder saw 131,900 passengers board in Minnesota stations. And the majority of this ridership is regional travel within the 400-mile Twin Cities to Chicago corridor. For a lot of people, it's the only option to driving and flying. And it's almost equidistant for some folks to find an airport for those trips. So it provides a good, reliable travel option in the corridor. Travel times will be faster than the current Empire Builder service, about 7.5 hours between St. Paul and Chicago. Top speed will be 79 miles per hour on existing tracks. Anticipated schedules about 4 hours different from the departure and arrival times of the Empire Builder service, making it possible for some folks to do same-day trips on these regional travel that they have. The Federal Railroad Administration ranked the Chicago to Minneapolis-St. Paul corridor the first in the Midwest of future enhanced services. The state departments of transportation in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, along with the Federal Rail Administration and Amtrak, are partners in project development, as I've mentioned. Service could commence in 2024 if all the funding is secured and a variety of agreements are in place. Next slide, please. Here's the proposed schedule that complements the Empire Builder service, as I mentioned before. Currently, the builder leaves Chicago at 2:15 in the afternoon and arrives in Redwing at 8:19, and St. Paul approximately 10:30, 10:20, 10:30. Eastbound, the scheduled departure from St. Paul is 8 a.m., arrives in Redwing at 8:54 a.m., and arrives in Chicago at 3:55 p.m. And as was announced today with the signing of the American Recovery Plan, Amtrak received $1.7 billion and will be reinstating daily service on the Empire Builder starting May 24th, which is great news. Okay, next slide, please. The majority, talking about the project specifically to make this happen, the majority of the infrastructure improvements necessary to accommodate the second train are planned in Minnesota, $40 million worth. And in Winona, this involves the construction of a new siding track connected to the main line of the CP, main line, excuse me, over a half-mile in length with power switches and signals to help alleviate congestion west of the Winona Depot. Construction of over 3,200 feet of new track, reconstruction of at-grade crossing at Beer Street, and install 4 new turnouts, railroad signals, and communication improvements. total estimated cost of these improvements in 2020 dollars is $9.1 million. And what this does is it facilitates the movement of the freight and the passenger trains together and helps both systems work more efficiently and more safely. Next slide, please. The second the area I want to talk about is the Winona Station siding, the board at the platform. In addition to in the area of Winona, the Amtrak station, the existing siding track will be upgraded and will allow for more efficient train meets that and our ability to clear the main track more quickly and efficiently. This will improve safety, clear crossings faster, and more safely for passengers who can board the train from track adjacent to the platform instead of walking across the track. Note that the Winona platform improvements will be made by Amtrak through a separate project. Another element of this around the station is the rehabilitation of 12,000 feet of existing siding track, install new turnouts, railroad signals, and communications. Estimated costs in the footprint of around Winona Station in 2020 dollars is estimated at $10.2 million. The next section is the River Junction in La Crescent. The river bridge, which is located in Minnesota, we're not right down the middle, but it is a Minnesota asset, and it is a choke point for freight movements now, and oftentimes impacts the Empire Builder's ability to navigate through that area. The improvements include a conversion of an unsignalized yard track into a second signalized main line, again, to facilitate movements. Alignment of the bridge switch would be modified to allow for increased train speeds through the switch, and a new mainline track would be increased, the speed would be increased from 10 to 25 miles an hour. Now that might not seem significant, but if you've taken the Empire Builder and you've gone across it, you realize how slow movements are through that area because of the age of the bridge and lack of accommodating rail infrastructure on either side. You know, I say this a lot, the secret to going fast is not going slow, and a 15-mile-per-hour increase across this segment is significant in movement of the freight trains and impacts the Empire Builder. Finally, this project area, the alignment of track approaches and replace the bridge track at movable points will increase the freight speeds on the river bridge. Construction of 5,000 new feet of new mainline track and 2,100 feet of connecting track and the yard work will greatly facilitate movements across here. All these improvements address significant bottleneck for both freight and passenger rail service, and the total estimate of these projects is $20.8 million. Next slide, please. Project cost. The total project cost for these improvements to accommodate a second train are $53 million, 40 million of which is in Minnesota. We've been working with the Canadian Pacific Railroad all along. They've been helping us refine our project estimates where infrastructure improvements need to take place. Matter of fact, we were anticipating some movements in around Columbus, Wisconsin area, but with talking with them, they were more focused on getting improved travel times by making those improvements across the river bridge. The estimated annual operating cost is about $12 million, and 40% of that will come from fares. The first year, the split of the 40%, or excuse me, of the $12 million, the remaining share has yet to be determined. Do we base it on track miles? Do we base it on boardings? And that's just one of several areas as we move closer to implementing that we're going to have to refine and define and have agreements on. There's a bevy of contracts and agreements that need to take place for this to happen. One would think the track is there, put a second train on it and run it. Well, it doesn't necessarily work that way. Next slide, please. The project funding capital commitments already, Wisconsin's committed to $6.2 million for the improvements in their state. primarily at Winona, or excuse me, at La Crosse and in the footprint or near the depot, adding of a second main line and improvements at the depot in La Crosse. Amtrak's committed $5 million to the project. And then this last fall, we received a federal consolidated rail infrastructure and safety improvement grant from the federal government for $31.8 million. Additional federal funding has been secured through what's called a Restoration and Enhancement Grant Program, and $12.6 million of federal funding to support startup operating costs for the first 3 years of service as part of that $12.6 million. Just note that these federal programs are highly competitive nationally, and we are pleased with the recognition at the federal level and with Amtrak at the merits of this project. So with that, I'll be available for questions later, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin. Thank you.
All right, Dan, thank you very much for that overview of the second train project. I'll talk to you a little bit more about the benefits of the project itself. And I think when we think about benefits of the project, initially we think of, well, it's just a second passenger train. It means I can get on earlier and get off later, and it's just a convenience kind of thing. It's much more than that. The economic benefits for this second train project are quite lengthy. This project will create jobs, more than just the temporary jobs in constructing $53 million worth of track signal and bridge improvements, but it'll support other businesses in Minnesota that do business with Amtrak. It'll generate economic growth, even beyond tourism. Business travelers can be more productive and spend their time working on the train more comfortably, more conveniently than they could on a train, and certainly can't do that in a car. It's an alternative to driving or flying. As Dan mentioned, some small towns, even in Minnesota, Redwing perhaps, and others in Wisconsin, don't have access to air travel. You'd have to drive very far to get to an airport that'll take you somewhere outside of your immediate area. So this has been described by some folks as transportation equity for smaller towns in the Midwest. It'll improve access to a number of important destinations, not only the state capital, but to universities and colleges in Winona. It'll improve access to tourism destinations and other important locations right here in Redwing. And it gets you closer to other important destinations near the station cities as well. It'll improve freight train speed and operating efficiency. This is a big one. This is Canadian Pacific, as Dan mentioned, supports this project. This is a passenger rail project to us, but to them, the improvements that are needed to accommodate a second train with their freight rail traffic is a great benefit to them. They can move faster through some of these bottleneck areas and improve their operating efficiency and save a great deal of money. And I'll describe some of these things a little later too. And finally, improved safety. As Dan mentioned, there are a number of intersection improvements that will be built as part of this project. There's also a unique situation in Winona where the hospital is on one side of the tracks and their ambulance service is on the other side of the tracks. As trains move through that city at slow rates of speed, if you have an emergency at that time, that could be incredibly costly. Thanks. On the next slide, a little more detail. This project and in securing federal funds for this project, it's not simply how nicely you can ask the Federal Railroad Administration for funding. You have to justify this in economic terms. This project, the ROI stands for return on investment. For every dollar we invest in this capital project, we see a return of $2.44 in cost savings and an additional revenue. And that's fantastic return on investment. As I mentioned before, the benefits of this project go beyond just the immediate economic value of building the project and job creation. $71 million worth of goods and services were purchased by Amtrak from Minnesota businesses in 2019. And those businesses are all over the state. They're not just located in the Twin Cities, they're throughout Minnesota. Thanks. On the next slide. Here's a big number, $159 million in economic competitive benefits over the next 30 years. This was part of that federal grant application that Dan Crum described, where these benefits come from not only saving savings, but savings with freight inventory and freight shipping costs that are reduced, but travel cost savings are part of this number as well. And then increased productivity in businesses that I mentioned, where you could be productive on the train, where you can do things on the train that you can't otherwise, and the tourism industry, where this benefits tourism by providing a second means of access to the river communities for a variety of different reasons. This number doesn't include something important to it, doesn't include safety benefits and environmental benefits, which are more value on top of this number. All right, on the next slide. Okay, thanks. This is the freight operating and inventory savings slide. More than $34 million can be saved in operating costs and inventory savings over 30 years. There's a lot of great information in this federal grant. Within that federal grant, I've learned that it costs about $1,200 an hour to operate a freight train in Minnesota. That's an expensive ride. The value of the goods and things that are hauled on these trains varies, but it's roughly around $7 million. When you can move these goods a little bit faster through Minnesota, a little bit faster through some of these choke points and tight areas that we have here that are going to be improved through this project, you save time and you save money. And this is a tremendous amount of savings for the freight rail industry. And that's a great reason why Canadian Pacific Railway supports this project. Okay, on the next slide. Here's an interesting comment. This is a quote from Scott Olson, president of Winona State University. He uses the passenger train, Amtrak's Empire Builder service, now the daily service, as a recruiting tool for students to come to the university, to come to Winona State. The survey there, some information that was taken a few years ago, says over 40% of the students at Winona State and St. Mary's have taken the train to school, and well over half would take the train more often if there were more service available. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is make more service available to students in Winona. And I know that the train is very convenient to Winona State. My son lives in Hockey Hall, and it's about 5 blocks from the depot, and it's an easy walk for him to get to the train and back to come home when he needs to. Thanks. On the next slide, some information about tourism. The second train will support tourism growth in Minnesota, especially in cities along the route, bringing visitors to many museums. You can bring to natural areas, town festivals and other things like that. There's a great picture of the St. James Hotel just up the hill from the depot there in Redwing. The Great River Rail Commission estimates that about $4 million would be spent annually by tourism boost just on the second train alone. Amtrak's figures estimate that a little less than half of their riders are essentially tourists, people coming to events, people going to visit relatives and things like that, count those as tourists. And the average tourist spends about $200 in Minnesota. So 39,750 trips, roughly 40,000 trips, additional trips into the Minnesota stations, into St. Paul, Redwing, and Winona. We think this train will boost tourism spending in and around these areas by about $4 million a year. On the next slide, I mentioned business travelers and then the value of that. Business travelers can gain about $64 million in productive time over 30 years. Time is money. We've all heard that saying. And when you're a business traveler, and business travelers do use the passenger train quite often, they can save a great deal of money, and they can be more productive on the train and do business while they're there. And you can see there's a picture of inside of the Amtrak train. You've got plenty of room. That's in if you 92% of you have been on a train, you know this already, but the seats are much bigger. You have much more room to work. You can go to the observation car. You have a table there. You can even have a little meeting with a colleague if you need to. It's a great place to have a meeting. It's a great place to work if you have to travel long distances. Thanks. And on the next slide, the last slide about benefits, about environmental benefits and safety benefits. Almost $7 million can be saved in avoided vehicle emissions over 30 years. The lion's share of the riders on the second train, as they are on Amtrak now, are people who choose to take the train rather than driving to their destination. You may still drive to the depot, to the train station to catch the train, but you're not driving all the way to Milwaukee or all the way to the Dells or all the way to St. Paul from wherever you're coming from. So we expect to reduce vehicle miles of travel by over 17 million in the first full year of operation. And as ridership increases, that number goes up and we reduce even more VMT. So that's less tailpipe emissions coming out of automobiles. Trains are also safe. There's a statistic there. Train motor vehicle collisions have decreased tremendously from 1972 to 2018. And a lot of that is due to the implementation of positive train control. I don't know all the details of how positive train control works, but it essentially helps reduce the level of human error or mechanical error that happens when passenger trains and freight trains are traveling in these corridors. It eliminates the possibilities or reduces the possibilities of high-speed derailments and things like that that cause injuries and hurt folks. So positive train control is implemented in this corridor, and it will be used by freight. They're using it now, freight service and passenger trains as well. With that, that wraps up what I'd like to describe in benefits for the second train. I'll hand it over to Mike Wilson, Mayor of Redwing, to tell you what's in it for Redwing.
Thank you, Kevin. And yeah, that's the big question that was, put forward. What is it? What's in it for Redwing? But I look at it this way. We're the gateway here for southeastern Minnesota, not only Redwing, we've got everywhere from Fargo, Rochester area, down even to the Iowa border. You have people that will come to Redwing to get on that train because it's so easy, much easier than driving up into St. Paul and getting on the train. So that brings people to town to get on the train to go. It opens it up as a nice alternative way to get to Chicago, get to Milwaukee, get to La Crosse, wherever you want to go. And like Kevin touched on, it's 46% of the passengers are the tourists, so it's a huge draw. Brings people to town. It makes it an easy, nice trip to come to Redwing to take in all the things we have made available, whether it be going to the casino or maybe they bring their bikes along to ride the Cannon Valley Trail. So there's a lot of options there. The second train will also be an alternative to the Amtrak's Empire Builder. So you're going to have flexibility of 2 trains going, so you can set your time frames a little different. So it'd be extremely handy for someone that's going to make some travel arrangements and be flexible in that area. And I look at it too as saving time. Say you want to go to Chicago or Milwaukee. By the time you go to the airport, 2 hours early, check in, sit around, wait, fly, get to the airport. It all takes so much time. I know we've gone to Chicago in the past, and if the train's on time with the one we have now, you can get there just fast as flying, and you're all so much easier to travel. I know in the past we've gone to a Twins game in Milwaukee. A group of us go down usually every other year, and how handy is that? We get right off from downtown Milwaukee. We're close to the stadium. Cab right away. We go and take in a ball game and stay at a hotel and come back the next day. It's just an extremely fun trip to do, and it's so simple to do and cost effective. So, and I think of it too as on the as far as moving the freight with these improvements to the along the line there. Our former business, we used to haul racing fuel up out of Texas, Borger, Texas, and we'd send a truck down once a week, and he'd make the round, and the cost on that was well over $2,000 a trip. Well, we looked into the rail. We started shipping rail cars out of Texas with 28,000 gallons on it at a time, and it cut our freight in half. And it was extremely beneficial. And same with our methanol. We were same deal. We're trucking that in out of Illinois. We started railing it in, cut our costs just about in half. So it was amazing money saved doing that way. So everything kind of falls into place on this with the improvements. Not only with the time frame with that train going to be on time, which is of course a big factor. You want to always leave when it comes. Right now sometimes it's a little iffy, but with that train leaving St. Paul, it's going to be on time. That train's going to be clean as a whistle. It's always been one little concern of mine coming out of Seattle. That train gets a little tough looking by the time it gets to Redwing, but this train coming out of St. Paul is going to be fresh. The people are going to be fresh. Same when you come out of Chicago. Same thing. You got a clean train. The people, the crew, everybody's fresh, and it's a lot nicer trip. So I would look forward to that too, because that's especially nowadays with the way things are, and you want things to be tidy, let's say. And with this train, this dedicated train coming out of St. Paul, I think we could look forward to that, and it'd be a huge asset to the travel in this region. And it's, yeah, we're definitely behind this 100%. Thank you. And I guess I'll turn it over next to Brian Nelson, if you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson, and thank you for the Great River Rail Commission for hosting this fantastic forum. Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Nelson with All Aboard Minnesota, and we are a nonprofit citizen group which is advocating and educating for more long-distance rail passenger service within the state of Minnesota and connecting Minnesota to the upper Midwest. Our vision for a route system for Minnesota largely mirrors the MnDOT State Rail Plan, of which we are in very much support of. There are many routes that we think should be added to the state for passenger rail service, but we're really focused on 4 main routes right now, mainly for their propensity for what we believe will be immediate success. Of course, at the top of that list is the second train frequency to Chicago. But we're also advocating for extending the second train from the Twin Cities to Fargo Moorhead on a daytime schedule, which will utilize the same route as the Empire Builder. We're also advocating for new service between the Twin Cities to Duluth and new service from the Twin Cities through Northfield, Owatonna, Albert Lea to Des Moines and Kansas City, which would connect Minnesotans to Amtrak service to San Francisco and Los Angeles. All 4 of these routes are currently in the MnDOT State Rail Plan. The second train to Chicago and the Twin Cities to Duluth are in what are called Tier 1 status. And extending the service to Fargo and the new service through Twin Cities, Northfield, Albert Lea are what are called in the emerging corridor route part of the plan. Dan and Frank can correct me if I'm wrong with that, but it's interesting to note that all 4 of the routes that I just mentioned were in existence right before Amtrak. And with the exception of the Twin Cities to Des Moines service, all of these routes had multiple frequencies per day, and they were largely around morning, afternoon, and evening departures. The demand was there before, and we believe that the demand is there now more than ever for at least these 4 routes. You can see our entire route vision at our site, allaboardminnesota.org. If you go to the homepage, you'll see what's called proposed routes. Click on that. A map will pop up. You can see what we're advocating for the state and to connect us to the upper Midwest. And then on that page, there's also a brief description of each of the routes that we're proposing, the 4 of which here that I just mentioned are included. We heard earlier about the benefits that the second train would bring to the state and to Minnesotans, and all of those benefits would apply equally to these other routes that I just mentioned. They would have sort of a multiplier effect, if you will. And a couple years ago, All Aboard Minnesota, in partnership with the Rail Passengers Association, commissioned a study on some of the benefits of extending the second train to Fargo Moorhead. And we modeled out some rather interesting statistics in that this route alone from St. Paul to Fargo could generate anywhere from 100 to 140,000 new riders annually. 60% of those would come out of cars. It would reduce car miles in the corridor by almost 10 million trips, which would greatly reduce highway maintenance costs and, of course, reduce the carbon's emission footprint. It would generate almost $5 million in new visitor spending alone. And of note along this route between St. Paul to Fargo, there are 9 colleges, of which in 2019, we estimated there was a population of those 9 colleges of around 52,000. And what we understand is that college students have a higher propensity than the average citizen, if you will, to use passenger rail service. So that could spike ridership even higher. But if you look at, these 4 routes and a map of the state of Minnesota and all of the cities and towns that are within a range of, let's say, 10, 15, 20 miles, you're impacting hundreds of cities within Minnesota and hundreds of thousands of people within the state that mainly rely on highway travel alone. So you're tremendously expanding travel options, mobility options for a lot of people that can't or don't want to drive or fly. So one other note that I just like to make is that the United Transportation Union did a survey a couple years ago, statewide survey, and they asked people throughout the state if more passenger rail service from urban areas like the Twin Cities to more outstate cities like St. Cloud, Little Falls, Mankato, Albert Lee, Redwing, Duluth were offered, would you support more passenger rail? And 73% of Minnesotans said yes. So that's a significant number of people that would support more passenger rail. So with that, I will turn it back to the Great River Rail Commission, but we believe that there's tremendous opportunity for more passenger rail service in the state. We think that the second train is going to be successful out of the gate and will lay the foundation for some of these new services that I just described. Thank you.
And thank you, Brian.
Yes, Brian, thank you very much. I think we've got another survey. We'd like everyone to use their mouse again and take a little survey for us. I think Jill is going to bring that up for us. There it is. Number 2, you've heard all about the benefits. You've heard about the project. Would more trains per day make passenger rail a more viable travel option for you? Adding service, does that make it a more viable option for you? And second question on this list is, which benefit do you feel is most important to you and your community? So there's no right and wrong answer here. This is just what you value in terms of a second train. There we go. Thank you. So please put in your answers and we'll see the tally here in just a few seconds. Yep. Following the poll, Paul Drodos will give us a call to action, and then we'll start taking your questions. Here we go. Would more trains per day make passenger rail more viable option? Yep, almost 100%. 98% said yes. And here we go. Which benefit do you feel is most important to you? It looks like the largest answer is having another travel option, followed close by tourism. Yep, environment, business travel there too, colleges and universities as well. So very good. Well, thank you for taking our polls. Now I'll turn it over to Paul Drodos, Commissioner of Goodhue County. Will take us home and give us a call to action.
Well, I think call to action is the order of the day, because we've been working on this train for a long time, and now the crunch has come. We've been very successful over the years, and once again this year the second train is in the governor's bonding proposal. When I think about call to action, it means who are the people that can actually make this happen. We've heard some very convincing arguments this evening about the cost-benefit ratio, about safety, about the environment, and actually about a forward-looking plan for our country and planning travel. But how do we achieve that? Well, right now, if we can get $10 million, we could make $40 million in improvements. And I think it's important that people remember that we are helping Winona and Winona County, but all of the other people in the Great River Rail Commission are also signed on to this because they want to help the state of Minnesota and they want to help Southeast Minnesota, and it's a good idea. So the call to action, first of all, is there's a take action page on the Great River Rail website, or also in our chat this afternoon, or this evening rather. All you have to do is click on that link, and we have a nice 2-page form which gives you all the options on how to contact the decision makers. So If you have a relationship with your legislator at all, or even if you don't, I myself have written to the governor and have received replies. I've written to Secretary Buttigieg in Washington. I have not received a reply yet, but the point is that unless people hear from us and hear for us, they won't really know what we want. And I think most of us here this evening want trains. So the way to do that is go to this link, either in the chat room or on the Great River Rail website. And I did it this afternoon. There's nothing to it. It just says take action. And that gives you a place to make comments, share experiences, and find your legislators or decision makers. This will take a vote in the House and in the Senate for Minnesota to pass the bonding bill. And as you know, we've already testified for that to some effect. And all I can say is if you're excited about it, if you're interested in it, and if you want it, you have to let people know. And those people are in St. Paul, or at least they are wherever they are, but they vote in St. Paul. So let's take that site once again, the Great River Rail Commission, or the link on our chat this evening, and open it up. And we can't do it alone. I'm starting to sound like somebody on NPR, but the fact is we need your help here. And getting that help just means taking some time, expressing your opinion why this is necessary. And when you talk to people who have ridden the train, I had some friends that went to a Lions convention in Chicago. They had a fantastic time. People visit their family, their friends. It's a rendezvous point. Chicago's a great place to go, and so is Milwaukee. So when Mike says tourism, that's also a great place in Redwing for people to come here and visit our city. So I just want to urge you and thank you for participating in this, which means you're already a fan. But the main thing is that you actually get heard in St. Paul, because this vote for $10 million will make all the difference to this project. And I think for the environment and for the country, it's a great idea. And we heard about all aboard how these connections can grow and improve. And that's really what this is about, the future. So that being said, I want to leave some room for questions, but please support this project by contacting your legislators, your decision makers, and your friends, and explain the benefits of the second train to Chicago. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for wrapping it up like that. Now we'd like to take some of your questions, and we've got a number of pre-submitted questions. I think we'll take those first, and we'll just kind of hit the top of the list and go right through as many as we can. Then we'll get to your questions in chat. The first question is, with the Empire Builder running only 3 days a week, is the proposal to run this new service on the other 4 days, or to run it all 7 days? The proposal is to run the second train as daily service. It would run all 7 days of the week. And as we heard the announcement from Dan, starting just before Memorial Day, the Empire Builder will be back to full service, daily service as well. So Empire Builder will be back to full service daily, and the second train would run daily as well. Second part of that question, is there a proposed time and schedule? And yes, and we had the schedule up in the presentation. The train would leave St. Paul a little bit later, about 3.5 hours later or so, and it would leave Chicago about 3.5 hours earlier. So it would get into St. Paul a little sooner, it'd leave St. Paul a little bit later, and affect the schedule down the line the same way. Second question is, how will this investment benefit Minnesotans not residing in towns in which the train will call? Well, the second train is another travel option for people that would going at a long driving distance. You have a choice. I live in Dakota County. I don't live near a station, but I can drive a short distance to the depot in Redwing or in St. Paul, and I can take the train a long distance to Milwaukee or Chicago and benefit myself that way. So it's a great travel option for people if you're a business or if you're a person who doesn't live right next to a station. The next question, can you tell me more about the revenue benefits for the communities and how business and industries would have the larger benefits? We described the tourism benefit for this project would be roughly $4 million per year, and that's just in Minnesota. That's just people coming in, as Mayor Wilson described, that I've neglected to mention, people bringing their bikes on the train and riding the Cannon Valley Trail, staying in a hotel, getting breakfast the next day, staying in town for a theater event or something like that, or a festival, and then heading out a couple of days later. Those are the tourism event for the river towns is the biggest benefit that we think we see for the second train, in addition to the other benefits we mentioned in terms of creating more business for businesses in Minnesota that do business with Amtrak. More trains means more business for those businesses that work with Amtrak. The next question, I want to express support for the initiative. Someone who lives in Chicago with family in Wisconsin and Minnesota, they would appreciate more options. Well, thank you for your comment. We hope to give you more options and more options to everyone who lives along the route in all the cities between St. Paul and Chicago. The next question is what positives relating to the environmental impact will there be in the second train? I think we described that in one of the slides where we expect to provide about 124,000 trips per year on the second train. These are mostly trips, the lion's share trips, I want to say upwards of almost 90% of these trips would be people choosing not to take a car. So if they don't take a car, that means they're not driving, and there's an environmental benefit with reduced auto emissions associated with leaving your car at home or driving just a short distance to a station and then taking the train. The next question is, do we know that Redwing will be a stop, or is there anything we can do to assure that it's a stop? Yes, Redwing will definitely be a stop. It's one of the stops that was modeled in our process of selecting alternatives. It is one of the Empire Builder stops, and the second train will be stopping at all the Empire Builder stops, and Redwing is definitely one of them. The next question, is there any chance that the second Twin Cities train could run through to Duluth? The scope of this study, and Dan, anytime you want to answer these questions, just raise your hand, but I can say that the answer to that question is not in this time frame. The scope of this study is simply to develop a second passenger train between Chicago and the Twin Cities, and there's another project working on Duluth to Minneapolis that could complement this, and but the scope of this work is simply Chicago to Twin Cities. And Jill, and Dan, if you are able to jump in and add to that, please do.
Yes, Kevin, I just want to point out, we are working on the Northern Lights Express. That project is, the planning for that project's done. We've done all the environmental clearance. Now we're just in the position of waiting for funding to make that happen. To connect to that, though, we got to get through Minneapolis, St. Paul. And Brian mentioned some of the other corridors that are in our state rail plan to Fargo, Moorhead, to Des Moines, Northfield to Des Moines, Mankato potentially. But the biggest issue we have to address is getting between the two downtowns. The congestion there is tremendous. So if we do receive manna from heaven to continue to develop the projects in the rail plan, our focus is going to be looking at the downtown connection piece. Initially, when we were started to work on this feasibility study for the second train, we had an option of looking at getting it to St. Cloud. However, the capital cost in dealing with a second railroad, a highly congested railroad, did not outweigh the demand initially of ridership. So we are comfortable with walking before we run, and that's getting the second train, and we can grow from there. If there's other capacity improvements that are necessary along the TCMC corridor to add more frequencies if demand warrants it, we'll address those at that time. But we really have an issue with the congestion in the Twin Cities itself. And by stopping in St. Paul, we alleviate that for the time being.
Great, thank you, Dan, for that addition. The next question is, what is the best case timeline for this service to start? Likely 2024. As Dan mentioned in his presentation, we need to finish final design, we need to get environmental clearance, and then put all the other pieces in place with the local matches to secure the federal grant. And then there's a bidding process where you have to scope the project and put it out to bids and select a contractor. And that all takes a fair amount of time. So so 2024 is when we think we can have service up and running. That's only 2.5 years from now. So that's kind of exciting. And next question, what would the forecast arrival departure times, including connections using rail resources, be to and from Minneapolis, St. Paul Airport to ORD, that is O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and the Redwing station? I'm not entirely sure I understand that question, but I think it's a comparison of travel times. If you took the train between St. Paul and Chicago versus flying. from Chicago to the Twin Cities or vice versa. So we've done some work on that. Jeff, I don't know if you're able to kind of pull that information up, but we did a travel time comparison of the two. I don't know if our destinations were St. Paul and Chicago, but we did a travel time comparison, and taking the train, I'd have to look at this and get a real solid answer for you, but I would say taking the train is a little bit longer, but it's far more comfortable, and you can be far more productive on the train than you could be on an airplane, especially squeezed into a coach seat. Next question is, what time will it leave Minneapolis? I think we saw from the schedule that Dan had, it would leave St. Paul. I think it was 11:47 a.m. I think that's correct. And what time would it leave Chicago? It would leave Chicago about 11:05 in the morning. So it'd leave a little bit later from St. Paul than the Empire Builder, and a little bit earlier leaving from Chicago to go to St. Paul than the Builder is. Would it make all the stops that Amtrak currently does? And the answer is yes. We'll stop at all the station stops. Actually, the second train will make, I think, 2 more additional stops. It'll stop in Glenville, and I'm not sure if Sturtevant is the other stop. There are 2 stops at the Milwaukee airport, but there are a couple of extra stops in that leg of the trip on the second train that where the Empire Builder does not stop. The next question is, will the primary emphasis be on sightseeing and tourism, or getting from place to place quickly? A little bit of both. We're going to try to get to tourism destinations and all your other stops as quickly as possible. This project was scoped in such a way that it would remove bottlenecks. And as Dan said in his presentation, the key to going fast is to not go slow. So by removing some of the bottlenecks and increasing speeds over the swing bridge in La Crosse into La Crescent and through Winona and in the CK Tower CK area, we can improve speeds and get folks to where they want to go faster. But the majority of the trips taken on passenger rail are tourism trips, visiting people trips, other things like that. So that is still the major trip purpose on the trains. Next question is, what cities would be the train stop along the Mississippi River corridor? In the Mississippi River corridor in Minnesota and into Wisconsin, it would originate in St. Paul. It would stop at Union Depot in St. Paul, and then of course go to Redwing. And then farther down the river would stop in Winona, and then it would stop in La Crosse, last river community, before it heads east and gets into Toma and crosses Wisconsin. The next question is, why was Amtrak not invited to provide comments? Amtrak is here. We've been working with Amtrak on this project for years, and Minnesota DOT and Wisconsin DOT are leading the study. The Great River Rail Commission is hosting this advocacy event. Derek James is here from Amtrak, and he's been a great asset and a great help, and very supportive of the second train. All of Amtrak has all of their staff and communications people as well. So we didn't include him in the program necessarily, but he's definitely here. The next question is the status of the infrastructure in the corridor, about double tracking, crossing upgrades, and side tracks. Dan, if that's, or Frank, if that's a technical question there, would you guys mind tackling that one?
Well, I'll start, but Frank can fill in more of the pieces. We're looking at what it's going to take to get a second train on there, and safety is a concern. Our office at MnDOT, we also do the grade crossing safety program and invested millions of dollars in this corridor already. I believe back in the late 70s, early 80s, it closed a number of crossings in Winona to address safety. So we're going to address what we can, what we feel is needed based on traffic volumes and such. The double tracking, as most people that follow rail here know, it was double tracked all the way to Chicago before, but the cost of having that infrastructure there not being used because of capacity, the railroad took it out. We feel that if we deal with the siding issues in Winona and the improvements at the river crossing, we can address capacity issues in the short term. Now, if we're looking at it in the future, adding 4 frequencies, that would change the game dramatically. But we want to just add the first train first and go from there. And $53 million for those improvements is fairly constrained compared to some other corridors that have tried to expand service. So we feel relatively fortunate that the railroad agrees in principle with what we're suggesting and the amount of improvements we need to add this train.
All right, thank you, Dan. I see we're running just a little bit out of time. I've got two more questions. I'd like to hit these two, and then we'll see what we do with our questions in chat. Next question is, in the past, Talgo had 2 trains ready to go. That's referring to service that was high-speed service that was kind of planned from, I believe it was Milwaukee to Madison, that service that never happened. I believe these trains are somewhere else. We're going to be using refurbished Amtrak rolling stock for this project. It reduces our capital costs. We don't have to buy brand new train sets and build them into our costs and work that into our federal grant application. It'll increase our operating costs a little bit because we'll be leasing train sets, but we're going to be using Amtrak rolling stock for our second train service. And the last question is, does the fabulous Redwing Hotel, the St. James Hotel, or the Prairie Island Indian Casino know about this project? Oh, yes, they do. We've contacted them. We've sent them information about this. And in fact, Prairie Island has in years past, they've sent a representative to our commission meeting. So they've been involved even in the commission. And the last comment there would be really easy to have an escape weekend to the hotel or the casino from the Twin Cities, and you bet it would be. And normally there is shuttle service from downtown Redwing into the casino. I think it's been suspended now because of COVID, but all of that is going to be coming back, and you can do that. You can take a trip down to Redwing. You can get into Treasure Island, see a concert, or win some money, whatever you'd like to try to do, and enjoy yourself that way in the future. Now we've got a number of comments in chat. I see Jeff is unmuted. I think he's going to give me some directions as to how to handle the chat questions.
Yeah, Kevin, and everyone here on the call today, we have reached the end of our program. However, maybe what we can offer is thank you very much for those who stuck around. If you'd like to stick around further, we can probably answer some additional questions, or we can put the questions and answers up on our webpage and send you an email to link you to those. Those of you who are presenting and or answering questions, you can stick around if you choose to, or you can take off, but I can read through a few of the questions that were in the chat if you'd like. Kevin and Dan, Frank, are you willing to stick around for a couple more minutes?
Yeah, we're all good.
Sure.
Great. All right. A couple of questions here from our friend Andrew Peters in Lake City. During the presentation on increasing transit time on the corridor, Goodhue County has 58 at-grade railroad crossings. More than 50% have crossbucks or no signs. FRA standard state top speed is 10 miles an hour. Considering building parallel service roads and close many of these crossings to increase the speed. So what is the plan for some of those at-grade crossings in the future?
Dan, why don't I jump in here and address that? This is Frank Letterly with MnDOT. We have a separate group of people at MnDOT who are responsible for managing the grade crossing safety program and administering funds that are dedicated directly for grade crossings, and that includes the Section 130 funds. And we are preparing a grade crossing safety action plan. This is a directive of the federal government. It's something that we maintain. And the way we do it is we have a database of every single grade crossing in the state. We have a risk calculator. We apply the funds that we receive to the riskiest crossings. So I think to address the specific question about what is happening to grade crossings in this area, we don't have we haven't got a particular set aside for grade crossings as part of the TCMC project, but we are working on grade crossings throughout the state. And if, as a follow-up, I can take a look at, I can have a chat with our grade crossing people and see where these grade crossings are at in our risk register. I would say though that I agree that it would be better to have more protection and fewer crossings. We Once again, this is an economic issue. We would like to have more money in our grade crossing account, but we certainly are addressing the issue as best that we can.
Yeah, Frank, I'd add to that too, that there is a proposal for additional grade crossing funds at the state legislature that the House and Senate will be taking up. But in addition to the crossings that just have crossbucks, we have signal systems out there that are decades old, antiquated equipment. We're trying to address those as well in terms of safety. But to me, an equal concern are the private crossings, particularly along the river here. You have the fishing camps, you have people that cross that maybe once or twice a year, and they're not used to seeing passenger trains going at a higher speed than the freight trains. And oftentimes they're not aware that there's the level of freight traffic on this corridor as well. So our focus is on safety, our focus is on increased capacity, and we're going to do all we can. There's a proposal for grade separation at Treasure Island to lessen the possibility of incidents there as well. So along this corridor, we're going to try to keep investing as much as we can in safety. And that's what we can do with the limited resources we have.
Frank and Dan, we've got another question or a couple of questions for you. And then if I can put Derek, if you're willing to hang around, if you could be on deck, we've got a couple of questions on what kind of vehicles we can expect to see here. But first, let me ask Frank and Dan two questions. One is about the status of double tracking and some bottlenecks at the Hastings River crossing and the La Crosse River crossing. And then another question from Carol says, how much of these upgrades or improvements are things that just need to be done, whether there's a second train or not?
Dan, why don't I jump in and get you started here? One of the key pieces of analysis that we're required to do whenever we propose a passenger train project like this is a capacity analysis. And we work very closely with the railroad. We've done this capacity analysis for TCMC. We've done it for other projects. We've done it for NLX. The objective of this analysis is to look at the existing freight traffic, identify issues and problems that exist, and then we add the passenger traffic and see what the changes are. I will say that one of the challenges for planning passenger rail service is that the infrastructure that we operate on is private property, and private companies maintain this private property. The railroad system is virtually the only transportation system in the nation where the company that is operating the service is actually maintaining its own right-of-way. We don't have that for highways. We don't have that for waterways. We don't have it for airports, but the railroads own the track and they maintain the track, and they're very good at knowing just exactly how much money they need to spend in order to operate their trains effectively. So when we do the capacity analysis, what we're doing is we're looking at the existing situation, we're adding our trains, and we're determining what we need to do to make our trains run on schedule and reliably. So the capacity improvements are going to benefit the freight trains, but the real reason we're doing that is to make sure that the railroad is able to operate our passenger trains on schedule every day, day after day, without interference from the freight trains. Dan?
Well, thanks, Frank. And I know Andrew's been riding me a long time about this, the Hastings Bridge, but at this time, the railroad is not identified as that a major bottleneck or a concern. Keep in mind, north of Hastings, the traffic's directional with BNSF. Both railroads run north on one of their property's tracks. They run south on the other property's tracks. So, and then before Hastings, they split. So again, the railroads will let us know if there's a capacity need beyond what our modeling will show. And they have their own capital investment programs on their own to address freight bottlenecks absent passenger trains. And wasn't there a second part of that about the equipment as well?
Yeah, and we can probably address that to either of you, but also Derek is on the call and is unmuted and available to answer the question. We have several questions on what type of train cars and locomotives would be used for this service, and what is the age and the emissions tier of the locomotives that might be used, and then maybe a little bit more about the types of vehicles that could be included. Would there be a baggage car? Could you put bicycles on the train, and some of those things? What do we know at this point, and how much, what are we looking at, do you think, Derek?
Well, let me start off first, and then
Yeah,
Derek can get into the emissions and everything. First of all, initially, we're looking at using refurbished Amtrak equipment, and Derek can provide more detail on that. But the states in the Midwest have done a procurement of the new equipment, the new Siemens equipment, of which a car is behind me, of the new single level equipment. And also Siemens is making the Charger locomotive the most efficient, I think, most efficient locomotive in the world right now, other than electric. So eventually we want to get new equipment, but we're going to have to negotiate that with the other states to be part of this Midwest rail car and locomotive equipment purchase. And we'll leave it at that. The stuff is state of the art, accommodates bicycles, it accommodates wheelchairs. The bathrooms in these things are incredibly user-friendly for people with disabilities. And this is actually a car from the Bright Line that runs between West Palm Beach and Miami, and had the opportunity to ride it. And it's a whole different type of train. It's not your dad's train anymore. So I'll send it on to Derek, please.
No, I saw the question about the emissions, and these Charger locomotives, I think, meet Tier 4 standards. They're 90% more emissions friendly than the Tier 0 locomotives that are out there right now. As Dan had indicated, the Midwestern states that we operate contract service for, and that includes Wisconsin, have acquired a fleet of these to power all of the short distance corridor trains, which this one would be one of those. Minnesota is not a partner in that, but Amtrak is in the process of acquiring its own fleet. We have 75 of those new locomotives on order as well. So we will be re-equipping the Empire Builder and conceivably other trains with these new locomotives as well. Our existing locomotive fleet is at about more than 20 years old, and it's time to replace them, and we are replacing them.
At this point, we've kind of exhausted most of the questions. There have been a lot of great comments in the chat as well. And so I appreciate those of you who have included comments, things including that it's not unusual for communities along this route to have no or very little transportation alternatives outside of Amtrak. Some certainly don't have airplane service, and many don't have bus service. So for many people, again, from the equity issue, this might be their only option outside of driving a car, which some people either can't or choose not to do. Other comments have included things, I put tourism as I see it, greatly impacting the right of in a positive way. As a college student who has used Amtrak before, I would personally benefit as a means of travel. Please encourage the mayors and county commissioners to contact their legislators, and because as elected officials, you carry influence. Likewise, we believe that that all of us carry influence with our legislators, and so of course that's why Commissioner Drodos has asked for any of us to contact our legislators about this project and share how you feel. Andrew Peters asks, quite some time ago, there were what are called Tiger Fund grants. Are those exhausted at this point? Is there any money left there? And we may need to unmute Dan.
I did it myself. There are other federal programs out there for these type of improvements. I don't believe Tiger still is in existence. There are build grants that are more general in purpose for highway and rail projects, but the Federal Railroad Administration has an aggressive program for passenger rail, and this administration and general discussions about what the next federal transportation bill will be, there's an emphasis on rail and rail improvements and passenger rail, particularly based on the history of our new president riding Amtrak daily to Congress or to the Senate from Delaware. So we anticipate there'll be a number of programs, federal programs, but it takes matching funds to do that. This project here, $53 million project, all the money's on the table except the Minnesota money. And keep in mind, to get the project where it is now, over the years, the states and local partners like Ramsey County Rail Authority, the Cross Planning Agency, have put in, and MnDOT and WSDOT, 1.8 million of local money to get the project to where it is. So we are proud of what we've been able to do, cobbling together, work on this corridor with the limited resources. And we're just waiting for the 10 million from the Minnesota legislature so we can begin the agreements with Wisconsin on cost sharing, construction agreements with the railroads, the grant agreements with the Federal Rail Administration. Those things take time. And we need to have our money available and in place before we can begin that process.
One other question in the chat: are there plans in the works to create a hub and spoke system as a feeder to the train stations? How do we move people to and from Redwing, Winona, St. Paul?
Well, as I mentioned before, we have to walk before we run. And I think Terry laid out some of the other corridors that we've envisioned in our state rail plan. We have a graphic, and I'm going to share with Jeff for future presentations, that we did an analysis of number of people that live within 30 miles of this service in Minnesota. And it's 61% of Minnesotans live within 30 miles of this corridor. Wisconsin is 59%. There's 120 plus different educational institutions. There's 26 hospitals along the corridor. There's countless resorts and entertainment opportunities along the corridor as well. So we know that we have a travel shed there. We just need to make sure that we design this right, make it complement the existing longer distance service. And I harken back to when the first light rail line came to the Twin Cities. Everybody wanted one afterwards. What do we have to do to get our next one? And that's kind of the same thing that's going to happen here. We get, as a state supported service, I have a feeling that it's going to be a lot easier to get the second corridor, the third and fourth corridors into development. And that's our goal.
Very good. Kevin,
Jeff,
I think it's time to wrap up. What do you think?
I think you're right. And I just want to note in the chat, the page from the Redwing Visitors and Conventions Bureau would like to be included in further information moving forward. We'd be glad to include you, Paige. We certainly will. And Barbara asked if the slides from the presentation will be available to share with others. We should post those to the Great River Rail Commission website at some point. Maybe we could even do that. Today's Thursday. We could do that very soon in the next few days.
Yes, we can. And we'll send a follow-up email to our participants today with a link to that slideshow.
There you go. Even better. Well, thank you. I think that we've gone through all our questions. We've gone almost half an hour over. Thank you for staying. Those of you speakers, thank you for joining us. Thank you for presenting material to everyone, and all of you who joined us to learn about the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago second train and the benefits. And remember that call to action from Commissioner Drotos. Get in touch with your legislators. Let them know that this is an important project, that Minnesota's $10 million is the last money in to be combined with Wisconsin's, with Amtrak's, and the federal grant that we already have. Usually the federal money is the hardest to get, but not in this case. We need Minnesota's money to build these track and signal and bridge improvements to make this project a reality. So give them a push. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night, and we've got information about our website. We post information every so often. Please check out our website and follow along with the Great River Rail Commission and with MnDOT and MnDOT's website as well. Thanks.